Hi, I'm Carrie and welcome to my studio. Today I am very excited to share everything that I knit in 2024. If you're new here, I am a knitter and knitwear designer based out of Columbus, Ohio, and I've been knitting for about 16 years, designing for about 12 years, and I have a day job working in the corporate fashion industry, and I also have a 2-year-old who keeps me very busy. This is where I share all about all of my knitting projects, and I started my podcast about halfway through this year, so some of these knits you may have seen if you've been following along on my podcast, and some of them you probably won't have seen unless you potentially follow me on Instagram or follow my new designs. I'm really happy with this past year of making, and while I'm not the most prolific knitter out there, I feel really good about the things that I did make this year, and I'm excited to share them with you today. So let's get into some stats about the things that I made this year. So I knit 22 total projects this year. That was 7 adult sweaters, 4 kids sweaters, 7 adult accessories, and 2 kids accessories. So something that I found very interesting, 19 of these projects were fingering weight projects, and then I had 2 worsted and 1 DK. So it was a very fingering weight heavy year. So the project number isn't necessarily super high, but almost everything was fingering weight, and also the total project number still is higher than some of my previous years. Working from stash has been a big focus for me recently, so I'm excited to say that 13 of these projects were from stash, 9 were with newly purchased yarn, and newly purchased, I have a definition of purchased within 1 year before I cast something on. So everyone may have a different definition of what newly purchased is. So newly purchased for me is just, I've gotten it relatively recently, not necessarily for that specific project where like I buy the yarn and immediately cast it on, but you know, sometimes it takes a little while to get to something. So that's kind of why I use that year period as my newly purchased definition. And then one last interesting stat, although I knit 22 projects, I actually only knit 13 different patterns. And that means I did a lot of reknits this year. That being said, a lot of those remakes did have some kind of twist or variation from the previous time that I had knit it. So it was still kind of like knitting something new because it wasn't the exact same thing. So since I have a lot of multiple project knits where I knit the same pattern a couple of times, I'm going to go through all of my projects mostly chronologically, but grouping everything by pattern, so it may not be quite exactly chronologically, though I did knit a lot of these relatively in close succession. There may have been a project or two in between the multiples. So that's how we're going to do things here, and let's go ahead and get started. A little note from editing Carrie, I'm inserting a little try-on video for all of my sweater projects. Please do ignore the green sweatpants that I am wearing in all of these try-ons. I was cozy in some sweatpants and they happen to be green. So the first pattern I knit this year was Plinth Tee, and I knit this twice in 2 variations. I did a short sleeve version and a long sleeve version. So I finished the short sleeve version first. That is here. It is a bottom up t-shirt with a peplum hem that's knit sideways in garter stitch, and then you pick up from there, knit in the round, and has nice drop shoulder shaping, scoop neck. This is the short sleeve version. I knit this in Why Not Fibers Soul in the spiced cider color. This has become one of my most worn pieces. This was my first finish of the year. I actually knit most of this in 2023 and just kind of had a little bit left to complete in the very beginning, early January of 2024. And definitely has become one of my most worn makes. Of course, during the winter time, I'm not wearing it as much, but during like all of the other non-winter seasons, so spring, summer, fall, I am absolutely wearing this a ton. It's a really easy piece to just, you know, throw on with some pants and go to work and look nice. So it just has a really nice, easy fit. And yeah, it definitely has become one of my fast favorites. So my second Plinth Tee is a long sleeve version. So after I knit the first version, I wanted to be able to represent the long sleeve version in the pattern photos for this design. So I thought, why not just cast on another one and knit one up in like a month before the pattern release. So I knit this one up super speedily using Madeline Tosh sock in the whiskey barrel color that I've had in my stash since like 2014. So I had had it in my stash for 10 years, like a whole literal decade. and used it to finally knit a gorgeous sweater. So again, it's something that's become a great wardrobe staple. This one's definitely trends towards cooler weather wearing, so I am wearing this one. If it's really cold outside, I'm also throwing a cardigan over the top of it. Again, it's just a super easy, nice to wear piece. Easy drop shoulder fit, long sleeves. It has a cushy little garter hem in the sleeve, kind of tying back to that little peplum flounce. So it's just a really lovely piece to wear. I love it. I'm super excited to have it in my wardrobe, and again, one of my favorite knits of this year. Next up, I have a whole bunch of socks. So these are all the Rock Mill socks pattern, and I knit 4 of them. So again, this is a design project, and I wanted to represent the different stitch pattern options that are included in the pattern. There are actually 6 stitch pattern options. I only knit 4 of them, but I still got a majority of the stitch patterns in the samples that I knit myself. My preview knitters also knit up a variety of these as well, so all 6 stitch patterns did get represented, at least through preview knit projects. This was my first one here. This one is worked up in Coats & Co. Cottage Sock. I am not sure of the colorway at this point. I bought the yarn a couple of years ago. It was a leftover skein that I hadn't used after knitting my Kidan Tee, so this was just hanging out in my stash, so I turned it into a sock. And then this one is worked in Destination Yarn Postcard in the Kale colorway. I bought this yarn 2022, so still technically a stash yarn there. This yarn is actually a couple of different leftovers. So the top of it is the same as the Coats & Co. The middle and the bottom are both from other sock projects that I had previously knit. I cannot remember which sock projects at this point, but just leftovers that I had in my stash, and did a fun little gradient. And the last one over here is worked in One Twisted Tree Prime, again in an unknown color. I've had this in my stash for a very long time, and this dyer is no longer dyeing, but again, I had the yarn, so I wanted to use the yarns that I had in my stash. So I'll go ahead and bring this up a little bit closer to the camera so you can see the different stitch patterns and the colors in these projects. So again, this is the Coats & Co. This one is Destination Yarn. This one is a variety of yarns used in other projects, and I did a little gradient. And then this one is the One Twisted Tree. You can see they all have slightly different stitch patterns. It's all the same textured base where you have kind of a broken rib and then garter ridges just in varying amounts to create different striping effects. So they're just really nice basic socks, and I wear these a ton. I'm already starting to get felting in pretty much all of them around the heels and the toes. That's a really common wear spot for me. Overall, they're holding up very well in the wash. These are all like light fingering, superwash merino and nylon blends, which is generally my preferred blend to use for a sock because it does hold up to my less than ideal care that I put my socks through, which is through the washer and through the dryer. Again, I know it's not ideal, but again, it's what I do and what I have time for, so here are these socks. The next pattern that I knit is Little Plinth Tee, and I knit 3 of these. So these are all kids size versions of my Plinth Tee pattern. After I finished that project, I was so excited about my own, and I was like, I could just knit a matching one for my daughter. So I did, and then I turned it into a pattern as well. So this first one here is, caveat, this is felted in the wash. I accidentally put it through the washer and dryer. Oops, it happens. Now one of her stuffed animals wears it, but this one is worked in Destination Yarn Note in the Roadside Wildflower colorway. And this is the 18-month size, so she got to wear this over the summer. Again, has the same construction as the adult version. It has the sideways garter hem, worked from the bottom up. You kind of pick up along one edge of that hem and work upwards in the round, and do a little bit of shaping for the underarm, drop shoulder styling, scoop neck, and that little texture detail down the front. So all of the same details in the adult pattern, just in a little tiny cute pint-sized version. The second version that I knit is also a short sleeve version, but I did a variation with more volume in the bottom flounce for more ruffle. So of course, toddlers love to twirl, or at least my toddler loves to twirl. So having something with a little bit more flounce at the hem is really, really fun, especially for this age. So it was fun to include this modification to make this even more toddler friendly, twirl friendly. I knit this one in the 24-month size, so a little bit bigger, and with the hopes that my daughter will be able to continue to wear it into this spring, maybe. She's on the skinnier side, so we'll see if she'll be able to wear this come spring. I don't think I mentioned the yarn that I used for this one. This is Araucania Huasco, and I'm not sure the colorway. I may have the color notes in one of my earlier podcasts, but it is a lovely kind of reddish purple color. And then the last one that I knit is a long sleeve version. So again, the pattern includes both short sleeve and long sleeve options. It also includes that flounce modification. So again, wanting to represent a lot of the options that are included in the pattern. So this one was long sleeve. This yarn is Turtle Made Superwash Wool, and I am not sure the colorway again. I may have it in a prior podcast episode. It's a lighter blue purple color, which I think looks really nice, and my daughter has been able to get a lot of wear out of this one in the cooler months so far. Next is Wedgewood Tee, which I only knit once this year, and actually I technically did not knit this year. So I had knit all of the pieces, I think in 2021 or 2022, and I just hadn't seamed it yet or knit the neck trim. So there was still work to do this year. So while this isn't something that I knit in 2024, that's not super technically accurate, it is something that I finished in 2024. So this has a lovely texture garter V at the center with some traveling broken rib. It's a cropped length. It's worked bottom up, seamed in just 2 pieces, but the seams are just like the straight side seams, and then the shoulders, you could easily convert this to be worked in the round and like a 3 needle bind off at the shoulder. You just like remove the selvage stitches that are used for seaming and just omit them and work in the round. So it would be a super easy conversion if you're not a fan of seaming. I'm personally not very opposed to seaming. I think it's kind of nice to have a project in a really small package and get through a panel like lightning fast. It makes things like nice and portable and easy to work. So I'm a fan of seamed knits, but no, not everyone is. This is worked in Bare Naked Wool's Better Breakfast DK in the Daybreak color, and this is leftover yarn that I had gotten from a previous sweater that I had been commissioned to design for Bare Naked Wools a couple of years back. And by a couple of years back, like, I don't know, 2016, 2017, it's been a while. But I had a couple of leftover skeins, so I used those to complete this project here. This is not the first time that I've knit this piece. I've knit it, I think, 2 other times, and honestly, I would knit it again. I actually kind of want to knit one of these that has long sleeves. The pattern doesn't include long sleeves, but again, it would be a relatively straightforward modification where you omit the cast on for the armhole trim and just leave like a selvage stitch to pick up later for knitting sleeves in the round. So that may be something that I eventually get up to, but you know, I always have a ton on my knitting plans list, and yeah, I think that would be something for the future. The next pattern that I knit is Purse Tank, and again, I knit three of these. So this is a new design that I will hopefully release in spring 2025. And this project kind of started off at the beginning of last year when I was looking at all of my leftover fingering weight yarns and wanted to kind of find something that I could use a lot of those yarns in. And this top has a bit of a unique construction where you're working each of these panels separately, so you can mix and match colors, you can do a gradient throughout the panels, and really just kind of play with color. So this was my first iteration. I actually knit like the top part of this twice, and I ended up re-knitting this panel. I actually probably still have the original panel that I knit. I had knit this in a blue color, and then I just decided it was like too much going on, and I thought that kind of keeping things in a warm color palette would like be the right amount of art teacher vibes, but not too overwhelming in the art teacher vibes. It just felt like too much with the blue. So there are 2 gold panels and then 1 pinkish panel and 1 green panel. This one has a V-neck at the front and back, and I'll come up closer to kind of show some of those details. So there's I-cord edging at the neckline and armhole, and there's this slip stitch detail that travels along. And then it also continues under the underarm with a nice little lateral braid and down the bottom. So it's just a fun, simple piece that's a great way to play with color. The second one that I knit is worked up in Purl Soho Santolina, which is a cotton, linen, and viscose maybe blend, but a true summer yarn blend that was honestly pleasantly surprising to work with. I know sometimes cottons and linens can be a little bit tough on your hands, but I found this one really, really nice to work with, and I didn't feel like it was super hard on my hands. I think the most recent summer fiber that I had worked with was linen, and linen can definitely be a challenge to work with, especially for extended periods at a fine gauge, etc. So this one is really nice. I've been honestly just putting this through the machine and machine drying it as well, and it's been holding up great. And it's a great staple piece, being an almost black, dark gray color to just have in my work wardrobe and really get a lot of wear out of. So I'm not sure if you can tell, but I have the back in front. So I knit a scoop neck on one side and a V-neck on the other side. So you can wear it with either the scoop or the V in front, and it just kind of provides a little bit more versatility for this design. And the last one that I knit is in Knotty Pine Fiber Company's Advent from 2022, and I felt that this was a great canvas to showcase the gradient advent. So for each panel, I kind of picked 3 colors to blend between the top strap and the bottom, and each of the panels is slightly different, but they're all kind of like friends, which is kind of nice. So it's not necessarily quite as art teachery as my scrappy true leftover every panel is a different color blocked one. This one's a little bit more subtle, but still has a nice watercolor blended look that I think is really pretty. So this one has a square neck on one side and a V-neck on the other. And in practice, the square neck does kind of create a slight sweetheart at the center front. It does just gently pull down a slight amount, but I still think it looks really beautiful, even not being a true square. And again, it's just creating some nice versatility. So as I mentioned, this is a new design. I have not gotten the pattern completely ready yet, but I do hope to have this one ready sometime in the spring and maybe in the later spring. We'll see how everything goes this year. But the pattern does come with all of those neckline options, as well as guidance on how to adjust the neckline depth should you want a higher or lower neckline. The next pattern I knit is Micahs Ragin Te by Hannah Graham. And this is one of my only knit from another designer patterns that I did this year. I knit this for my daughter in the size 2 years, and I used the Loopy U Solid series in the pesto color. And this is a deep stash yarn from, I don't know, probably the early 2010s, somewhere in there. And I had just been hanging out for a while, and I was like, I have enough for a cute little baby sweater, or I guess a toddler sweater. She is a toddler, not a baby at this point. And so I knit her a sweater. This is a super cute pattern. I love knitting it. I highly recommend Hannah's pattern. It has these sweet little cable details, and they're on both the front and the back, so you get a really lovely that really lovely column on each side. And I just modified mine to have a split hem at the bottom. That's not included in the pattern, but a super easy modification to make. I would definitely knit this again. I think it looks super cute on my daughter. The only thing that I would do differently potentially is intentionally knit a different gauge just because this was a bit of a fine gauge and I had to go down a couple of needle sizes to a US2, and a US2 at like this tiny circumference was just like, it eventually got to be a little bit much on my hands, so I would potentially see what kind of gauge I got on the recommended needles in the pattern, which was a US4, and just do a little bit of math and see what size I would need to make in order to get the intended dimensions that I wanted to get. So that would be the only change, but that's really just a me gauge problem thing and nothing to do with the actual pattern. So again, this is Micahs Ragin Te by Hannah Graham. Super cute pattern, very recommended. Next up is Catian Tee. This is a pattern of mine that I released a couple of years ago, and I just knit another variation. It's a super basic t-shirt pattern, but it has a ton of options in the pattern. So for this one, I knit I think I knit this between the high hip and the cropped length. That sounds about right. And I adjusted it to have a standard 1x1 rib hem instead of the twisted hem detail. I knit the straight body version, the short sleeve, and adjusted to have an I-cord neckline instead of the rib neckline that's in the pattern. And I may still go back and re-knit the sleeve hems to also do an I-cord at the sleeve, but I have not done that yet. That being said, I love wearing this. This has become a regular in my wardrobe rotation, and I guarantee it's going to continue to be a regular in my wardrobe rotation in the years to come. And knitting this one just made me want to knit like a bunch more of these in like solid colors and also in cotton that I could just throw in the washer and dryer and treat like a regular t-shirt. So that's kind of what I would love to do if I had like infinite knitting time. I would just always have one of these on my needles and have a bunch of t-shirts, both short sleeve and long sleeve, because the pattern also comes with a long sleeve option. And yeah, just have a whole wardrobe of basic hand knit tees. This is like my perfect V-neck depth. I can knit any of the body fit options for kind of some variety in there. I really love knitting this. It went super fast, and I would absolutely knit another one of these, and like, as I said, like another 10 of these if I had the time. So maybe we'll see another one of these show up. Actually, we absolutely will see another one of these show up in 2025. I have a long sleeve one that's languishing on my needles. I'm having a great time with the light, guys. The sun keeps coming in and out behind the clouds, and now we have a nice blown out section here and darkness over here. I'm gonna see if I can do something to fix that, or we'll see if the sun decides to hide behind the clouds again. This one is Kidan Tee. Love knitting it. Will absolutely knit it again. The next pattern I knit is Wedgewood Vest, and this is worked in Fiber Space Vivacious 4-ply in the maple syrup colorway. And this is a design of mine from I think 2017 or 2018 or so. I re-knit this to kind of like modernize it to be more in line with what I like to wear today, both in terms of color palette and in terms of fit. So the original pattern has a longer length and has like a center front and center back split to help provide some additional ease of movement in the hip area. And instead of having that center front and center back, I did a little side vent. So the pattern does include a modification of like what you're supposed to do to be able to do a side vent. So I just followed those instructions to do a side vent. I knit it to a shorter length. And then I also lowered the neckline a fair bit to just be more scoopy versus kind of like, not really a crew, but just a higher scoop, and I made it a lower scoop. So this was a really fun knit. It is all knits and purls, but you have the really dynamic traveling rib detail that looks really, really lovely. And what's nice about this design is even though there isn't any shaping, you can kind of block it to sort of have shaping. So you kind of pin out the hip and the bust to be the measurement that you want and leave the waist area unpinned. And that kind of like naturally helps cinch it in just with that structure of the ribbing. It'll kind of stay cinched and adds a bit of a fitted look without being too fitted or feeling constricting at all. So it's just a really nice skimming fit. So I loved revisiting this pattern. It was really fun. I ended up messing this up quite a number of times as I was knitting it, just like completely blatantly ignoring the instructions in the pattern. So that's one thing when you're knitting your own designs. Like sometimes I'm just like knitting from a spreadsheet versus the actual final pattern file. And when you knit from a pattern file, you actually have to like read the instructions versus just, you know what you're supposed to do, you know what comes next, you're very just in line with what's going on in the pattern. And when you're several years out, that's no longer the case. So you actually have to read the instructions. And sometimes, apparently, that is not my strong suit. So I had to reknit things a couple of different times in a few places to actually end up with the intended result. But the finished garment is lovely, is perfect. Love wearing it, and yeah, it is a great summer addition to my wardrobe, and I can definitely extend the season of this one by just wearing a cardigan on top of it as well. The next two patterns I do not have with me as they're currently with my daughter at daycare, so I will just put up photos here and kind of go into the details for each of them. First up is the classic ribbed hat by Purl Soho. I just needed to knit a hat for my daughter so she would stay warm in the colder months, so I came back to the classic ribbed hat by Purl Soho. I've knit this a couple of other times before. I knit this for my daughter when she was a baby. I've knit it for my husband. I've knitted at least one other time, so this I think is the fourth time. It is a great basic ribbed hat pattern. It knits up super quickly because it's toddler size and it's just ribbing, and you're working straight until you get to the crown decreases, and then you have a hat. So this is my go-to pattern for just knitting a hat when you want a basic hat that you know will fit well because of that nice stretchy rib. So for this one I used Madeline Tosh sock in the whiskey barrel color, and this was leftover from my long sleeve Plinth Tee project. This is the leftover from the extra skein that I needed to purchase to be able to complete my project. So I had 3 skeins that I purchased a very, very long time ago that I knit most of the project with, and I had to buy an extra skein. Thank goodness that that color still exists in the Madeline Tosh space. Granted, it wasn't nearly an exact match, but it was good enough that I could just kind of blend things together at the end of the sleeves to be able to finish the sleeves. So this was the extra skein that I had bought this year. So technically it's a newly purchased project, but it is with a leftover yarn, and I just held the yarn double to work with the pattern. Madeline Tosh sock is kind of like a heavier fingering weight yarn, so when you hold it double, instead of being like a DK, it's a little bit more like worsted to Aran weight. So I just knit the baby sized hat, but knit it to the child size length, kind of assuming that the total circumference would be about the child size with my kind of heavier yarn that I was using. Next up are Catian Mittens, and I modified this pattern to be a toddler size mitten. So Catian Mittens is one of my own designs. So it has a bunch of different yarn weight options. There's fingering sport, DK, and worsted. And what I did was take the smallest size of the worsted weight numbers and use that in fingering weight to achieve a toddler sized hand size. And yeah, so I just needed mittens for my toddler, so I just went to one of my go-to easy patterns for mitts and made a few tweaks and ended up with some very cute toddler mittens. I definitely need to knit more of these because I think she has these with her at daycare, but I'm not 100% positive, and I definitely need to have backups because we're always like hunting for where these mittens are, and it is getting cold. It's going to be in the single digits next week, so that may be on my to-do list for the upcoming week, is to knit a few more pairs of mittens because it is getting really, really cold here. Next, I have Wheatley socks. These are a pretty old pattern of mine from I don't know when, maybe like 2015 or something like that. They're just a super classic textured knit purl patterning with kind of a chevron design, and this is probably my most knit sock pattern outside of plain vanilla socks. This is kind of what I go to when I want something a little bit more than vanilla but still want a really, really classic look. So I just knit one pair of these. So I don't know why I have these on the hanger here. There's just one of them, but they were a really fun make. I took way too long to knit these. I had other things on the needles at the same time. So I like knit one, and then several weeks went by, and then I'm like, I really need to make the other one. And then I finally got the other one going. But love having these in my wardrobe now. I knit these in Knit Pick Stroll in the cider colorway, which is just a really great neutral. So I love having these peeking out over boots. And I will probably knit more of these at some point, though indeterminate as to when. I am also still having that kind of felting along the toe and at the heel. And again, this is kind of like the typical wear spots that I have. I usually end up with felting in the toe, felting at the heel, and then the first place that I'll run through a sock is like right kind of at the top of the heel flap. That's just kind of where my wear pattern is. So I'm assuming that that will be the same wear pattern that I experience here. Overall, I think the yarn is really, really comfortable to wear, and I will definitely be buying more of this to make more socks. I am seeing a little bit more pilling than I see in some of the like hand-dyed indie sock yarns that are a 75-25 merino nylon blend, but the price point honestly just can't be beat for Stroll, and it's beautiful solid colors, so I know that I'll definitely be getting more to just make more basic socks to fill out my wardrobe. Next is my last completed sweater knit of 2024, and that is Plinth sweater. So this sweater I have knit before, and I'm actually wearing the other one that I have knit right here. So this is a bottom-up seamed set-in piece. So a very classic fit and a very classic construction. So for this new one that I knit this year, I worked it in Brooklyn Tweed Shelter in the wool socks colorway, and I did the A-line fit for this one. So you can kind of see that there's A-line shaping. You can see that there's A-line shaping here at the side. So this pattern includes 3 body fit options. There's the straight fit, which I'm wearing here in the black sample, not that you can see the straight sides. Then includes the A-line fit, and it also includes a fitted version as well, which I have not yet knit. I had a couple of preview knitters work that option. It looks absolutely lovely on them. This was just to showcase another one of the fit options for the pattern, and I'm already wearing this one a ton. I wear this one a lot as well in the colder months. Being worsted weight, it does mean that I'm really only wearing it like in true winter time, or once fall starts to get like actually cold, because you know how fall is. It starts off with like hot fall, and then there's a little bit of like a glimmer of true fall, but then it goes back to hot fall, and then eventually you actually get like real like cool fall weather. So that's kind of the point where I can really start to wear this weight of sweater, because a lot of the times I'm inside, and when I'm inside, honestly, I don't always need much more than like a fingering or DK weight sweater, though I definitely can wear a worsted weight sweater and be quite comfortable as I'm here now, especially on a lot colder days. I had a really fun time knitting this one. I knit this up in 3 weeks, which is like crazy fast for me to knit a sweater, but being worsted weight and mostly stockinette meant that it went really, really fast, and I'm very glad to now have this one in my wardrobe as well. It will be going into fairly constant rotation, especially with the super cold snap that we have coming up. My last pattern of the year is Rock Mill Knits, and I knit 2 of these. So I knit both a fingering weight version and a worsted weight version. So you can see that there are different stitch patterns. Again, this uses the same textured stitch as my Rock Mill socks from earlier this year, and I wanted to showcase the different stitch pattern options in the ones that I knit. And this time I also included yarn weights. So I included a worsted weight in the pattern and fingering weight, so I wanted to make sure that I had samples for both of them. So the fingering weight version is worked in Knitting for Olive Merino, held with Untold Pure Silk Mohair, and this is a really lovely combination. I'm now like sold on the fingering plus mohair together thing. Like, I know everyone has been knitting this for like years, but this project definitely sold me on how nice the fabric is. It's like super light, but still really, really warm. So in the wintertime, I'm often still wearing fingerless mitts versus gloves or mittens, except for when it's like super, super cold. So I can still have access to my phone and also like have a good grip on the steering wheel as I drive. So fingerless mitts are kind of my preferred winter hand accessory thing. And these are definitely one of my new go-tos because they're really light, but they're still really, really warm. So I would say these are just as warm as like the worsted weight version, if not even slightly warmer because of that mohair. And they're still like super lightweight, which is really, really nice. Everyone else in the knitting world has already figured out, but clearly I'm behind here. The worsted weight version is worked in Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino. This is the slate green colorway, and I just love how the stitch definition really pops in this yarn. When I first got the yarn, I was like, I don't know, a little bit surprised by the feel of the yarn. The construction of it is a little bit different than what I'm used to. So instead of just like multiple plies all going in the same direction, this is like several 2-plies all spun together. So it creates kind of like a light and spongy fabric, which is honestly really nice. And I think that it might potentially help to stand up against pilling. So I would love to try knitting a sweater in this yarn. I do have a sweater quantity of heavy merino that I'm hoping to use this winter sometime. So I will be able to try that out soon and see how heavy merino holds up over time in sweater format. Thank you so much for joining me today as I talked through everything that I knit in 2024. This was quite a year of knitting for me. I'm really excited to see where 2025 takes me. I'm hoping to have even more knits next year than I did this year, not just to have more things knitted, but just really focusing in on knitting for things that bring me joy versus having to turn everything into a pattern. So that's more knits, more things that I love to wear, which is very exciting to me. And I hope you'll join along by subscribing to my channel. I share a podcast every couple of weeks where I talk all about my knitting. So be sure to stay tuned for the next episode. See you next time.